A poor girl pleaded. "Please don't take my home," the rich rancher said. "Then you must be my wife." Texas, 1876.
We'll get through it together.
The courthouse of a sun-drenched frontier town stood crooked and faded, like the memory of law itself. Inside, the air was dry and heavy. Lori Mayfield stood alone at the center of the room, her back straight, fists clenched tight around a sheaf of damp, crumpled documents. Land records, planting logs, receipts in her father's hand. Her voice had already been heard, her case already weighed. The judge lifted his gavel and looked down over his spectacles. Without a formal deed, no matter the years of use or improvement, the land is not legally hers. It is considered vacant property. The gavel struck. "This land shall be annexed to the adjacent Boone Ranch holdings." Gasps, some mutters, a few long stares. Lori didn't blink, she didn't cry, she didn't look back. Her nails bit into her palms so hard they bled, but she didn't flinch. Outside, the wind kicked up grit. Her boots crunched over gravel as she crossed the street to where her horse waited. Voices chased her down the boardwalk like old ghosts. She should have married by now, too proud, too stubborn. Fool girl, trying to hold land like a man. But Lori only climbed into the saddle, lips thin, jaw set. That land was where her father died with his boots on, where her mother's grave rested beneath the pear tree, where her hands bled over spring plowing. It wasn't property, it was memory. It was home. By dusk, she rode to the wrought iron gate of Boone Ranch. The horizon flared crimson as if the sun were bleeding out. A man stood in the yard, calm and alone, reloading his rifle with practiced, quiet hands. Thatcher Boone, the richest landowner in the county, a man raised hard and sharp, like the hills. He didn't look surprised to see her, just studied her under the brim of his hat. "You here to ask for your land back?" he asked, voice low and even. Lori sat stiff in the saddle. Her voice was not strong, but it was clear. "Please don't take my home." A long silence. Thatcher didn't smile, didn't mock, just looked at her like she was a riddle in the dust. Her dress was threadbare, her boots patched, her eyes, though, clear as melted ice and just as cold. He'd seen tears before, on prettier women, heard pleas, but this wasn't that. Lori wasn't begging. She was fighting for her life with the last weapon she had. Dignity. He said, "The only way for you to stay on that land is if it belongs to you." He took a slow step forward. "And the only way for it to belong to you is if it belongs to my wife." Another pause. Then, "So, marry me. You stay. That's the deal." Lori blinked. "Marry?" Her voice cracked like a whip. The word felt like a slap. "I'm not a trade. I'm not some tool you use to fix your border lines." "I'm not marrying for love," Thatcher replied evenly. "I'm marrying because you're the first person I've met who'd rather starve than lie." Lori stared. His eyes didn't flicker. She turned to leave, rage buzzing under her skin, but so did helplessness. She had no lawyer, no money, no rights. Her house would be torn down before the week's end. The field she had planted would be turned by someone else's mule. And somehow, this man, this cold, blunt man, was offering her something no one else had, a choice. She looked over her shoulder. "Fine, I marry you, but I stay on my land, and I stay me. No arguments here." By the next morning, they stood side by side in the mayor's office. A hastily prepared marriage license lay on the desk. A deputy served as witness. There were no flowers, no rings, no kisses. Just ink, paper, and silence. Two names joined, two strangers bound. Not by romance, not yet, but by something even rarer on the frontier, respect. The sun had not yet burned the morning frost off the grass when Lori stepped back across the threshold of her father's house. It stood exactly as she had left it, stubborn against time and wear. The front steps still creaked, the roof still sagged, and the air still smelled of dry earth and old wood. She let her fingers brush the worn doorframe as she entered, as if to reassure herself that it had not been a dream. She had married a man she barely knew, just to keep this place. Thatcher had not argued. He had signed a separate contract, in ink and dignity, that stated plainly, the house and land Laurie lived on would be recognized as a distinct portion within Boone territory. Her name was on it, not as a wife, not as a dependent, but as a steward. It was quiet, thoughtful, and binding. He had not said anything poetic about it, but she saw the respect in that silence. 2 days after the wedding, a man arrived with a toolbox and a pack mule. "Boone sent me," he said, tipping his hat. "Said the roof needs patching and the stovepipes bent." Laurie crossed her arms. "I did not ask for help." He scratched his neck. He said it was in the agreement. When she confronted Thatcher about it, he stood on her porch, unreadable. "You put that in the contract?" "Yes, you're not doing this alone." She stared at him. "I've been doing it alone for years." "And it nearly cost you everything." Laurie held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned inside. She did not slam the door, but she did not invite him in either. The work continued. She accepted only what was necessary. If the stovepipe collapsed, she let it be fixed. If the barn door fell off its hinge, she did not say no to a replacement. But the fields, the garden, the animals, those she tended herself. She drew lines, and Thatcher, to his credit, did not step over them. Until the matter of the well. It was midweek when she saw him there, stripped down to his undershirt and boots, dirt streaked along his forearms. He had been digging since dawn. The old well was too shallow, the water turning brackish. She had mentioned it offhand. Now he was 2 feet down, swinging a pick like any other hired hand. She approached, hesitant. "You didn't have to. You need clean water," he said simply. Then he struck the earth again. She stood there a moment, watching the rhythm of his work. It was strange to see a man who owned more acres than she could count, kneeling in her yard like it meant something. Later that day, the sun was heavy and hot, pressing down from a cloudless sky. Laurie carried a tin cup of water, still cool from the spring, and stepped carefully toward the well. She did not want to admit how often she had checked the window while he worked. But as she approached the edge, her boot slipped. The dirt crumbled under her. In an instant, she tipped forward. Before panic could even rise in her chest, arms closed around her. The impact never came. She felt the thud of another body cushioning her fall. The world righted itself, and she was not in the well, but pressed against his chest, one of his hands gripping her back. Their faces were close, her breath caught. His eyes were darker up close, shadowed but steady. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. She nodded, barely. He lifted her with ease, one arm behind her knees, and carried her back toward the house. Neither spoke. At the door, he set her down gently, his fingers lingering just a moment too long. She said nothing, neither did he. But when he walked away, Laurie touched her chest, startled by how fast her heart was still racing. That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The wind moved through the eaves. Somewhere outside, the well was deeper, safer. She did not sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because, for the first time, she did not feel entirely alone in the house her father built. The storm had not given warning. One moment, the air was thick with spring humidity. The next, it broke open, with wind and cold rain that lashed the earth like punishment. Laurie had stayed out too long that night, her coat soaked through, dragging burlap to cover the young corn she had planted only days before. It was not enough. The water had come anyway, rising over her boots, biting into her skin. She did not stop until her fingers were too numb to tie knots. The next morning, she did not rise. When Thatcher arrived, the front door was ajar. The house was quiet, too quiet, save for the soft sound of wind pressing against the shutters. He stepped inside, calling her name. No answer. In the corner of the room, he found her curled under a threadbare quilt, cheeks pale, sweat shining on her brow. He did not speak. He simply knelt, reached out, and felt the heat burning off her skin. He stoked the fire first. Then he boiled water, mixed herbs, found the small tin of tea she kept near the window. He wrapped a scarf around her neck, added another blanket, and sat beside her. She did not stir. That night, he stayed. He had not planned to. He had only meant to check in, to make sure she was safe. But her breathing was uneven, her hands too cold, her pulse shallow under her skin. He cooked oatmeal and forced her to sip from a spoon. When she coughed, he held the basin. When she shivered, he rubbed her hands between his own until her fingers curled slightly, instinct clinging to warmth. On the second night, the fever deepened. She muttered nonsense under her breath, names he did not recognize, her father's, perhaps. Memories slipped loose under the weight of the fever. Thatcher sat in the wooden chair beside her bed, boots still on, hands folded. Every few minutes he would rise, place another log in the stove, adjust the blanket, press a damp cloth to her forehead. The moon rose, full and clear outside the frosted window. He fell asleep holding her hand. Lori stirred, not fully waking, but enough to notice the weight against her palm. Her eyes opened slightly, unfocused, then fixed on the man slouched beside her bed, head bowed. He was asleep, lips parted just slightly, hair a mess over his forehead. His thumb rested along the side of her hand, not squeezing, just there. She whispered, barely audible, "You weren't supposed to care." Thatcher did not open his eyes. "I didn't plan to, but I do." Nothing more was said. The morning light broke cold and clear across the floorboards. Lori woke to the scent of broth and the sound of boots pacing. Her body ached, but the fever had lifted. She pushed the blanket back and sat up slowly. He was by the stove, stirring something in a pot. When he turned, his face lit with quiet relief. "You're awake," he said. "I am." She tried to thank him, but he shook his head. No need, no debt. Later that morning she cooked breakfast for the both of them. Just eggs and toast, but she had not cooked for anyone since her father passed. She set the table without saying a word, and nodded for him to sit. They ate slowly, quietly. A few glances passed between them, unsure and heavy, but not uncomfortable. At one point, he reached for the butter and said her name without thinking. "Lori." She looked up. "Thank you," he added. She did not ask for what, she only smiled slightly and passed him the jam. That morning the house felt different, warmer somehow, more lived in. They no longer called each other Boone and Miss Mayfield. The titles had fallen away, replaced by something unnamed, something quieter, but growing. Neither spoke of the night before. Neither called it anything more than what it was. But neither of them forgot. The golden light of late autumn spread across the Boone estate like warm honey, sliding over the fence posts and catching on the tips of wheat-colored grass. Trees swayed in shades of fire, leaves rustling like whispered secrets. The air carried the crisp warning of winter, sharp against the skin, but softened by the smell of burning wood from distant chimneys. It was the kind of evening that settled into bones, quiet and unforgettable. Preparations had begun early for the annual harvest gathering, a long-standing tradition among the ranchers of the county. Each year, it marked the end of labor and the beginning of long, dark months ahead. There would be food, music, and drink enough to forget the calluses on every hand. Thatcher Boone had not attended in years. Not since his parents died, not since the gatherings had felt more like performance than community. But this time, he planned to go. And he would not go alone. He rode to Lori's cabin just before sunset. The orange sky stretched behind him as he crested the ridge. Lori was outside, stacking firewood along the side of the house, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. Her movements were precise, rhythmic, like everything she did with her hands. When she noticed him dismounting, her brow furrowed. He wore a clean white shirt under a dark vest, and his boots had been polished to a mirror shine. His hair had clearly been combed with effort, though a single rebellious strand still fell across his brow. In his arm, draped neatly, was a soft gray shawl. Lori raised one eyebrow, suspicious. "No." He didn't flinch. "I'm not a decoration," she said flatly, brushing dirt from her fingers. "I didn't say you were." He stood there quietly, not blocking her path, not insisting, just waiting. His posture was relaxed but intentional, like a man who had come not to argue, but to offer something unspoken. When she didn't move, he said gently, "I'm not asking you to impress anyone. Just stand beside me, for tonight." The words sank in. They carried no pressure, only quiet sincerity. Laurie exhaled slowly, then reached for the shawl without looking at him. The main house glowed with lantern light. From the porch came the steady rhythm of a fiddle and banjo trading notes like old friends. The packed dirt of the yard had become a dance floor, boots pounding in time with laughter and clapping hands. Inside, long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, baked pies,